I always start with this. You know, any presentation I give about the JFK assassination or political assassinations, you always got to ask the question, why are we here? What's the reason? Why are we still talking about that? And I think, you know, a lot of you already have those answers. You know, but I really feel like we, the great researchers and historians that are going to be here this weekend, and all of you, are very passionate about truth and justice. And we've got, again, and they're interested in still the hope that we change our history in some form or some fashion. Maybe not in our lifetime, but at least we're on the right track. I've got 13 students here today came from our college, and their students are obviously curious and want to know what's going on. We hope that they enjoy the weekend as well. You know, be glad, make a point to talk to them. They're good. For the most part, I think they're a good group. We'll see. Okay. Okay, well, let's get going here. And I got to make sure I'm going to. So, as I've talked before, I'm going to be talking about the things I've came across and the declassification of the files, and I've looked a lot at documents and what they tell us. Some of you have seen some of my presentations before. You will probably see some things you may have seen before, but I always try to add to the narrative of what we find, things we have. Okay. So we're going to get going on that. And again, this is obviously this whole process started when the President of the United States, Donald Trump, decided not to go with the 25-year clock that was supposed to run out for the Assassinations Review Board, and there are still documents being withheld. A lot of them have been released. We've tried to look at them. Again, this is stuff that most of you are already aware of. Okay. Just a couple things there. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I did highlight, because I think this is significant. Obviously, Biden has also held delays, a few more documents released. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think it's significant that they only rolled it back, I'm trying to be optimistic here, that they only rolled it back to June 30th. And what does that mean? What will happen in June 30th? I know some people are talking about that maybe the CIA is still trying to find ways through the back door to stop the release of some of these things, but we'll see. Okay, so, you know, I've had a chance to look at some things. I know some of the researchers here have as well. I would say it's probably a good analysis to say there's not much in the way of new material in terms of significance that came out with this last release. It was very limited. I think it was more important, though, and you guys might have a different impression than I do, but I think it maybe was more important, maybe the reaction. If you recall, you know, I'm a news junkie, I follow things, and it just seemed like the media finally was paying a little more attention, especially the idea why, even if we don't know a whole lot about these things, why do they keep holding these things back? You know, you saw interviews. I think Larry Schnapp, who's going to be here speaking this weekend, was actually interviewed on national TV. Anywhere from the spectrum of Fox News to MSNBC, people were probably a little more at the media level. I'm sure we got a long way to go, but a little less along those lines of just dismissing all of this after 60 years. And again, that question. What are they? Or the government is still hiding. I guess we need to wait and find out. Keep waiting. Okay, so I hope I can manage this. Now, of course, most of you know who Gerald Posner is. He's kind of the longtime face of the low nut side of things, right?
So the National Archives just released more than 1,000 pages of newly declassified documents relating to the Kennedy assassination. Gerald Posner is an investigative journalist who has looked through those documents. He joins us tonight. Gerald, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
So first, let me just ask you, there are still documents that haven't been released. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing. 15,000 documents approximately haven't been released. I mean, these documents were sealed before you and most people who now cover the case were born. So it's been decades we're waiting for them.
So what, now you wrote a very famous book called Case Closed, which is a great book, arguing that, you know, the Warren Commission was essentially right in its assessment as lone gunmen. But what could possibly, there's got to be some reason to keep these things classified.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of it is the bureaucracy of the intelligence services. So they won't give up on documents if they think there's something in there they want to keep secret, even if it happens to be the name of a former agent or a way that they spied on embassies from Cuba and the Soviets years ago. So they lock those up. They keep them confidential. They fight against their release. And I always thought that it would take a president like Trump, who was president in 2017 when this issue came up, to say to them, no, I'm not buying the old excuses for confidentiality, release them all. They convinced him to hold on to them. And then it came up, in October of this year with Biden, who's sort of, been there long enough in Washington that he's comfortable with those intel services. So again, most of them stay sealed. What are they going to tell us in the end? It's not a smoking gun of a conspiracy, but I do think, Tucker, that it could be hiding the evidence that the CIA in particular had information that Oswald was potentially dangerous, might act out, and they didn't do anything a month before the assassination when he had a job on the route that the president's motorcade was going past.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor. Can I ask you, so you just went through the documents that have been released. Really quick, what jumped out at you? Anything?
What jumped out at me is this is not the way to do a document release, because they're releasing documents without telling you what had been secret before. So you get a new document, and some places like the New York Post and the Daily Mail ran headlines that said, by the way, Oswald was in touch with a KGB agent a month before the assassination. True, that's what one of the documents said, but that's old news. It was actually released in '98. What was new in that document was one sentence about the CIA spying on foreign embassies. So unless you go back through the old documents and compare them, you don't know what's new. The archives could do a much better chance of making this simpler for transparency's sake for historians.
And our journalists could do a better job. I mean, on many levels. But
I think that's true. But as we were talking about before, most journalists weren't even born when Kennedy was killed, so they aren't versed. They aren't in the weeds like I am on the case. So it's hard for them to know what's new versus what's old news.
No, that's totally right. We're glad you are. Joe Posner, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Well, let me just kind of fill in basically what it's all. I would call this kind of, from an intelligence terminology, a limited hangout coming from Mr. Posner about suggesting all of a sudden the CIA is at fault here because they didn't recognize the threat of Oswald per se in time, and they were aware of him and they didn't do anything. To me, that's what I would call a limited hangout. In other words, they're moving the needle somewhat and saying, okay, now, all right, and Posner's saying the CIA is at fault here. So we'll just leave it at that. I think you guys understand the point I'm trying to make. And there's been a lot of fuss, understandably, about Jefferson Morley's pursuit of the CIA files on one George Joanides, and I think and that made a lot of national press in December as well. And it's been over a decade. I think Jefferson Morley has filed FOIAs, everything else. There are still hundreds of documents on George Joanides. There's no question about that. Now, Joanides was, in effect, a liaison between the CIA and House Select Committee. And of course, the big problem was, as we find out later, he's right in the middle in all the most suspicious anti-Castro groups and running them at the time of the assassination. So I was on S.T. Patrick's program a while back, and he asked that question about, well, what's there with Joanides, you really think? And it's, until we actually see, I don't know, there are probably some people in this room that may know more about that. I kind of think that ultimately the next moving the needle might be to admit those documents might actually show us that, yeah, the CIA was connected to Oswald, not necessarily involved in the assassination, but they're still being withheld, right? Okay, so just some quick, overviews of different things on, that I've maybe spoken some before, but, when we start to look at these things, all conspiracies are not alike. I mean, the JFK, MLK, RFK assassination researchers have to seemingly argue the same facts over and over again. We've been doing it for, well, as much as 60 years. Though some in the media have tried to say, well, this is the JFK assassination is just a straight line between all the other crazy conspiracy QAnon stuff that's out there. I would say the JFK assassinations, we can draw a line instead of the distrust of the American public To me, that's more significant. Okay, too much sound.
Yeah, I got
See,
it.
I'm the guinea pig. We get all the kinks knocked out with me, okay? All right, so let's keep going. I've always felt the JFK assassination is rather unique because of the variance between the public's perception of it, and I think we as assassination researchers have won some battles there in terms of informing the general public where they're aware enough that they, something's wrong here, something smells, even if they don't have inside as much information as we do. But our institutions still stubbornly cling to that Oswald alone thing. Well, how important is this to get that straight? Well, I think a lot about things. I talk a lot about justice or injustice. I point out that injustice at any time, especially involving the murder of a president, is a threat to justice for all time.
Well, who said that?
I did.
Martin Luther King.
I did. He said that. I just modified it, by the way. Paraphrased it, John. Okay, that's right. Cicero, not to know what happened before you were born is to be a child forever. That's on my board, first day of class all the time. And I think democracy is hard, harder than autocracy, obviously. It requires openness, truth, justice. And we all know that authoritarianism is on the rise around the world. So I think there is significance and relevance to getting to the bottom of these cases still, okay? And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to try to move. I've always made the statement that the JFK assassination is more about being unsolved rather than being unresolved. I think we know a lot already about what happened in Dallas in particular, okay? So I'm going to go through some things, and again, some of you may have heard some of these things from me before, but I maybe add a little bit of narrative to it. Most of you know I was on a History Channel program earlier this spring, and it was a program that basically talked about tried to present different theories. I don't think they had every intention of solving the case, but they went through all these things. Of course, the Russians did it thing, okay? And I actually tried to push back hard from that when I was interviewed by the History Channel, but that never made it on the program, not surprising, right? But, and I pointed out to them a document that really demonstrates, I think, overwhelmingly that this disinformation that you're looking at here, obviously James Woolsey wrote a book, Leftover Cold War. James Woolsey wrote a book that the Kremlin might have been behind the assassination that came out here a couple years ago, okay? And more on that, okay? And the History Channel, when I did my presentation, when I went out there and on that video, or I don't know if you call it a documentary or not, talked about Khrushchev's motive, so on, whether he, revenge, whatever. Okay? And I know you probably have a hard time probably reading some of these, but I feel like this is one of the more important documents that I came across. And it was from an inside source codenamed Shamrock, and that we had inside the Kremlin. And Shamrock suggested a couple of important things. That the KGB, the Russians, actually believed that, they actually called them monopolists, interesting way of putting it, or the military-industrial complex was behind the assassination. Now, keep in mind, I've always said this, that, the Soviets, the Russians, they're liars. This is not propaganda, though. This is what they believed on the inside. I think that's important to know. And then even more to that respect, according to Shamrock, the Soviets felt that they could trust President Kennedy, they could deal with him on a cooperative basis, and even further, they mourned Kennedy's death. Now, how would someone who mourned Kennedy's death, be involved with it? Doesn't add up. And the rationality of it, Khrushchev, the prospects of starting World War III to eliminate a president, and you've got Johnson in the wings, that doesn't add up. And then another thing on the History Channel was, again, I had chances to push back on this too, that Castro killed him. And again, I have this whole narrative of the script that when I was You can read through it quickly. I'm not going to go through all of it. The motives of why Castro potentially could have killed the president. And again, I tried to push back on this, and thanks to Lisa Peace back there, she gave me what I thought was an important document, an IG report from 1967, where Richard Bissell, one of the top people in the CIA, obviously was fired by Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, point blank is asked in a report, the CIA hashed a plot to knock off Castro? True. Kennedy may have approved the assassination plot from Richard Bissell himself? Not true. So, and again, I know where some of that stuff comes from. Sam Halpern and former CIA guys circulated that narrative that Kennedys were aware or pushed or were part of the plot. Of course, Mr. Hirsch has written about it, but I'm not buying it, okay? All right, so we move on here. And of course, this is probably one of the most significant things that have come out from the new documents. It made national TV. You probably saw it, where Ruby told an FBI informant that he was going to go watch the fireworks that day. That's pretty hard to, unless this informant is lying, it's pretty hard not to see that Ruby knew something was going down that day, right? The man who eventually shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay? Now, what I got here you can't see very well. It's actually a 201 file on one Gordon McClendon, who I would definitely describe as a Texas insider, a man who knew Jack Ruby. In fact, I want to talk about that in a minute. But it's interesting, you can't read it very well, but it describes McClendon as a witting collaborator. Now, the CIA decided not to hire McClendon initially, but but they were still, he was on their radar. Okay? And what do we know about McClendon? A lot. In fact, my guy, Ed Tatro, is going to be doing a lot more on McClendon eventually. So, a media personality, a true Texas insider, he knew Jack Ruby. In fact, Seth Kanter has reported that when Ruby was arrested, he shouted out for Gordon McClendon. And then some connectivity here. There were witnesses who said that McClendon said something very similar that morning that Ruby did. That he was announcing he was going to go watch the president get shot. There are witnesses that said that. A man who knew Jack Ruby, Gordon McClendon. Okay? And I've got a little interesting story that sometimes things just come across, fall in my lap. And this is, I don't know, it's intriguing. I'm not saying it's a earth-shaking item, but I was talking to some people in my local area where I live in central Illinois. There's a town called Effingham, Illinois, about 45 minutes northwest of us. And I was told that people around that area, that a story had been circulating that the FBI visited an oil patch. The best way to describe it, central Illinois is oil country, not like Texas, but somewhat. And this oil patch or well area was owned by H.L. Hunt, of course, the oil magnate that owned things around the country. But the storyline was that the FBI visited the folks at this particular area in Illinois to tell them to keep their mouths shut, the fact that Jack Ruby had been working there in an H.L. Hunt oil field. That sounds a little bit extreme. Like, what does that mean? And I asked the same thing myself. But, we're talking about people that, didn't know a whole lot about the assassination. It's hard to believe they kind of concoct this. And there are a lot of Hunt properties, even today, where I live. I mean, the guy owns stuff all over the country, obviously. He was the richest guy in America, probably, in 1963. But on further checking, I found out that Effingham is a big spot and it was in those days, where the mob came down from Chicago and vacationed down there. There's a lake down there and stuff. There was a lot of mob connection down in that same area. So that's kind of intriguing. Obviously, I don't think Jack Ruby was working on an oil well, okay? But was he muscle? Was he doing something associated with the mob? Why did the FBI go to great lengths to tell them to shut up? Of course, we know that there's good evidence that the FBI tried to sequester, I believe the best way to put it, H.L. Hunt after the assassination. Okay? So let's talk about Texas a little bit, about Lyndon Johnson, okay? You folks, you obviously might know about James Wagenborg. Some of you Kappa people know that he'd given presentations, and he just died recently, unfortunately. He spoke at one of our conferences a while back. He was assistant for Life magazine as a creative editor in 1963. And Life magazine was the most significant media outlet in America, probably. I can make that argument. And he's oftentimes had stated that it was Life's intention to end Johnson's political career and possibly send him to prison. They were doing a three-part expose on Johnson with the express intention of bringing him down. But everything disappeared after after JFK was assassinated. In fact, Wagenborg said, "We didn't want to assassinate another president," I think is the quote. So all those things disappeared after the assassination. And Wagenborg said it was Bobby Kennedy. He was feeding them tremendous info for the whole thing, okay? And the reason I bring this up, because I've got another document I think is significant, is that, and then, again, you guys probably can't read that, okay? So in fact, I actually made the important points in the next slide. But this was a FBI memorandum dated February of '64, okay? And basically what it's suggesting is, number one, that Lyndon Johnson confiscated Bobby Baker's file from the Department of Justice while Attorney General Robert Kennedy was on a peace mission somewhere. So I guess Lyndon did not want people to know what, with Baker, okay? And that the Rules Committee was in a standstill because of it. So interesting document. And it kind of related to this, of course, Johnson's other scandal with Billy Sol Estes and so on, found a similar document about Estes where basically the speculation was that possibly Johnson and John Connally were basically making a big effort to get, by 1965, Billy Sol Estes, quote unquote, off the hook, okay, once he became president of the United States. Typical of making those scandals go away once he became president. Okay? And Don Reynolds was an insurance agent who was testifying the day of the assassination in Congress. And he was discussing about, again, the corruption between Johnson and Baker. Again, this is quotes from the people that were on that committee who were testifying. There's no doubt in my mind that Reynolds' testimony would have gotten Johnson out of the vice presidency. Okay? And then, of course, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the word comes to Congress that the president is dead, and so much for Reynolds' testimony. Okay? All right, I'm going to, again, keep going here. I know this is just stuff that I it may not all be coherent, but stuff that I feel like that we've come across that merits our attention, that we can tell a narrative about. And when it came to the Jim Garrison investigation, I think we found a pretty important document in regards to that that really showed how the CIA was engaged in actions designed to discredit Garrison in his case against Shaw, particularly this one. Again, I don't think I actually printed it out, but again, I highlight some of those things that are difficult to read. But it's interesting that Garrison in 1968 was going overseas to talk about his case, and the CIA is tracking him over there, okay? In fact, a document suggested that, describing what Garrison's appearance, where he was persuasive, and made a mark where they were at, but maybe the most important part of the document is an overt admission that the CIA was involved in spreading overt derogatory information about Garrison and sending it over there to their assets. They were specifically targeting Garrison to try to diminish whatever he was trying to do. Okay? Okay. I used to talk a lot about Harvey, William Harvey. I mean, you've probably heard me say things about Ford. He's obviously really significant. I'm not going to go through all that stuff again. I think a lot of you have seen some of those things. But I did find what I felt like was a very important document associated with actually John Roselli, who's could be obviously the Hollywood mobster who was connected with the CIA. And the CIA produced a report that was declassified of the chronology of their connection to John Roselli. In fact, it's always interesting. You see at the top of the document that yeah, they admit that he was involved with quote unquote gangster type actions. Well, why are you doing anything with him? And of course, we know Mayhew was a go-between in that. But the most interesting part about that document, the things I keep coming back to, is that it gives a specific chronology of the CIA's connections to John Roselli until William Harvey takes over as the operational officer for Roselli. Then the document says, we don't know what was going on after that, or we're not telling you, in May of '62, okay? All right, again, I'll try to move fast. I got a lot of stuff, so forgive me, tell me to slow down if I need to. Dave Morales, a very important CIA operative as well. We know that, I know my good friend Larry Rivera has seen a lot of documents on Morales.
Hey, David.
Yes.
We could probably add, too, that, Roselli, Giancana, and Hoffa were all the early liaisons with the CIA to assassinate Castro. And all three of them
Oh, yeah.
were murdered in
There are multiple
1975.
connections there for
The
certain.
House Select Committee was investigating. Roselli was actually brought up under secret Senate testimony, and then was found in an
Yeah.
oil drum with his legs cut off, floating in Florida Bay.
Yeah, obviously, I know a lot of you already know that, but Roselli ended up in a drum off the Gulf of Mexico, right? And Giancana was murdered. So, are we good, Dave? Yeah? Good, okay. So let's go on with Morales a little bit more. What I started to say was that we see a lot of documents on David Morales, who I think is in the middle of all this in some fashion. And yet I also came across a document, and I could talk to Larry about this more, where it actually said from the 1970s, a portion of his file of what has been sanitized. It even used the word sanitized back in the 1970s. So Morales is described in his personnel file as a one-man gang of the highest order quantitatively and qualitatively. He operated out of the JM Wave Station, excelled in counterintelligence sabotage, and here we go. A great number of miscellaneous activities that defy classification, and we wonder what that might be. So, but I do think it's ironic, and I'm going to go from there to the Bay of Pigs thing. And I'll just hold on Morales for a minute, because I found what I believe is a very good document in terms of what went on with the Bay of Pigs. A lot of people see it from the clear line between the Bay of Pigs, the debacle there, and the assassination of JFK. And obviously the huge split between the CIA and JFK, many of you know that story already. And some of us believe, I honestly believe, that in some ways maybe, I know David Talbot, his great book, Devil's Chessboard, talks about how this was kind of a made-to-fail operation. In fact, let's just go to that. I mean, and for a lot of reasons. Alan Dulles, who, then head of the CIA, he's off giving a speech in Puerto Rico, right, Larry? Is that correct? He seems totally unconcerned about what was going on at the Bay of Pigs. According to CIA's Robert Army Jr., that they, instead of sending the A team in for the Bay of Pigs operation, it was more like the C- team. But Morales was there. What does that mean? If they sent in a lot of incapable people, but Morales was obviously extremely capable. Obviously, the idea would be that this doomed by failure by design to force Kennedy to invade Cuba. The whole invasion was a ruse in the first place to force Kennedy's hand. He didn't do it. And here's the document that I think is significant in that. It's very important. By one Dan Brigham, who then was working for the New York Journal. I kind of think that Brigham was Mockingbird because he's reporting to the CIA. So it said the New York Journal does no longer exist, but Brigham stated he talked to a lot of the the Cuban exiles that were captured and or returned, and he came to the conclusion that a lot of the Cuban exiles believed that it was, in fact, the whole invasion doomed, quote, doomed to failure by design, and they were holding the CIA responsible. That is a pretty damning document, I think. Okay? All right. I looked at the file on Frank Sturgis, obviously. Mercenary, soldier of fortune, intelligence connected, some believe involved in Dallas and all sorts of other things. The House Select Committee talked to Frank Sturgis. There's a long interview in there. You want to look at it, go ahead. I looked through the whole thing. I didn't see anything terribly significant, except for one thing, the fact that Sturgis condemned one of the top guys in the CIA, David Atlee Phillips, for quote-unquote betraying us at the Bay of Pigs. Okay? Okay, speaking of David Atlee Phillips, and of course, Antonio Viciana, obviously one of the top guys in the whole Alpha 66, maybe the most dangerous and suspicious of Cuban exile groups. And I know there are people in this room who have differing views about Antonio Viciana and what he's connected in this room and know more about this than I do. I'm just here to kind of show you a couple documents that I found and what they actually mean. I think that it's pretty clear when we start to see who Viciana was connected to. It's certainly more in the way of the military. You know, for one thing, the guy was in the United States Army for a period of time. But let me just what I do also have, though, is a 201 file on Viciana, which means that the CIA had operational interest in Viciana and approached him. And it's pretty clear, and I've looked at this thing so many times, and it's pretty obvious that Viciana is resisting what's called their avoiding. This is coming from the CIA, that he's avoiding CIA penetration, okay? And that he wanted, under no circumstances, help. But then there's almost the asterisk here on this document. It also says that, you know, maybe if you want to talk some money, and then at the bottom here, to me, this is the most intriguing thing I've looked at, where Viciana apparently told the CIA was willing to have a conversation with someone in the agency sufficiently highly placed to make a commitment. I wonder if that meeting and whoever it was took place. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, and then another obvious point to be made about Alpha 66, not Viciana, but one of their top guys, Manoyo, apparently didn't pay his bills with the mob. So Santos Traficante, a well-known hoodlum, I like the way that was a Hoover comment there, wants to have Manoyo assassinated. But the important thing is the FBI notified the United States military that he was in trouble. They didn't notify the CIA. Okay? So again, take that as it may, okay? Okay. This is something I came across from the new documents I think is significant. It was basically the House Select Committee was in the 1970s was asking to, requesting information or discussions with several characters here associated with the CIA. And again, I'm going to check my list here to make sure I have this correct. And there's some big names on there, right? Let's see, we've got, well, one of them was Angleton, DeMornshield, William Harvey, but none of the stuff on the documents is redacted, except for this, when it gets to one Leo Sherney. Who is that? Okay, and so we did, why today does it CIA feel like necessary to, for whatever reasons, to have, you see the blank, maybe you can't see it very, very well, on Sherney, but not on any of these other guys. What are they withholding on this guy? And again, sometimes I just throw these things out because I'm looking if somebody else might know. I don't know. But one thing I do know about Sherney is that you do his background check on him, he was described as a longtime public servant. Gerald Ford appointed him to the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. So Sherney might be a guy that needs more pursuit. or maybe something withheld there that might be significant. I don't know, okay? And I want to spend some time talking about, and again, I've talked about some of these things before. Some of you have heard me before, but I always try to add a little bit to the narrative. But I really feel like when you look at the JFK assassination, you have to understand things in terms of interconnectivity, that it's really hard to say, okay, those people did it, that agency did it. And one of the reasons why I can say that is because I see this interconnectivity between the CIA and the military, in particular a secretive counterintelligence outfit known as AXI, a small unit that we found a few documents on. I'm talking to Bill Simpich about that, not a lot, but there are some things out there about AXI, but the connections with the CIA, the interconnectivity. So AXI is a small secretive counterintelligence unit inside the United States military that's become very suspicious for some people in terms of their potential for what they may have been involved in Dallas. Again, that's for your speculation, okay? And according to the Defense Department's history, AXI was started in 1960. Fletcher Prouty, obviously most of you are familiar with Prouty being a liaison between military, CIA, so on, executive branch, described AXI as the black intelligence arm of the United States military. So they would be suspicious in all this. So I want to talk about a few people that were in AXI. One of them is Dorothy Matlack. And what strikes me right here is that this is a CIA document dated 1958, where they're basically employing or bringing on board Matlack, who's already a member of AXI. But look at the date, 1958. The official Department of Defense history says AXI was not created until 1960. So were these guys just dark for 2 years? Or was that just a clerical mistake? I don't know. Okay. And then I know we got a lot of text here, but and I've got Bill on this a little bit, but what we do know about AXI and Matlack is that there was a meeting in April of '63. Also Sam Cale, who was also AXI. April of '63, George de Mornsfield, who of course most of us know as someone who probably was handling Oswald before the assassination. Supposedly to set up a business deal with a Clamard Charles, a Haitian businessman. But there was more stuff going on in that meeting probably. And again, look who's there. Not only AXI's Dorothy Matlack, but Tony, again, I may butcher this one, Ziankowski's CIA Domestic Contact Division were there. Were they having a conversation about a defector named Lee Harvey Oswald? Who's to say? By the way, on the document about Matlack, her job responsibility was track fake defectors. So, and Bill and I had a conversation about this last night, and I said, Bill said, I don't think she was involved with it, but she had to know something here, okay? And I pulled this up, which is kind of an obituary that I always find it interesting when you find these things where these people get all the praise or get a golden parachute on the way out. I mean, they're just glowing with praise about Matlack after she retired. And because maybe she kept some of the secrets, okay? And again, a lot of you already know about Northwoods. I think even my students know about Northwoods, some of them. But obviously a Joint Chiefs, obviously a document that came out after the Assassination Review Board in the 90s, very important, shows the extreme nature of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I think that's the real key, that they were willing to go to the Kennedy administration with all sorts of crazy false flag operations, anywhere from shoot down an airliner all the way to, well, maybe if John Glenn blows up on the pad, we can blame that one on the Cubans too. Or, shoot down an airliner, blame it on the Cubans, anything to create a false flag pretext to bring about an invasion into Cuba. Of course, the Kennedys shot all that down, right? Okay. And the reason why I bring that up, because it's pretty obvious that maybe AXI may want to go a step farther. Okay, a document that I found associated with AXI military intelligence just talking about what they need to do with Castro. And you're hard pressed to actually find a document, and there's probably some out there, some people, where even the CIA is going to, on paper, admit to assassination or want to go to it in terms of trying an assassination, although they were obviously involved in some of that stuff. But here's a document connected to Axie where they talk about, what do we need to do with Castro? Well, let's just remove him by assassinating him. It's right there on the document, man. So Axie's all about possibly doing some assassination. There's no question about that. They were willing to do it with Castro. By the way, there at the bottom, you can't read that. They also weren't above biological warfare. You can't read that at the bottom. Not against humans, though. At least not that, right? Sam Cale would say, again, another Axie guy, when he was working out of Mexico City, he had a hard time figuring out who he was working for. So again, I'm just trying to emphasize interconnectivity here, okay? Okay, let's keep going. How's my time? Anybody? Good? Okay.
14 minutes.
Okay, I can say a lot in 14 minutes. And this is more recent, of course, the Capitol insurrection, and I don't want to get political here. I know probably most of you don't, but this struck me. I mean, I look for things, the connections. You know, there's a lot of history teachers in here. We're always looking for the then and now. And after the insurrection at the Capitol, Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley made it clear about any attempt to overturn the election. Milley was quoted as saying, they may try, but they're not going to effing succeed. You can't do this without the military. You can't do this without the CIA and the FBI. We're the guys with the guns, and I see that as very ironic. Okay? And I've always said I'd like to maybe have a beer with Milley and say, were you talking about the JFK assassination? Who knows? Okay? All right, so, of course, all of us are interested in some historical truth about the murder of JFK and MLK. And of course, we're here for a lot of stuff on MLK. We got some tremendous speakers coming to you about the MLK assassination as well. But, I feel like, gaining some validation of truth within our institution it's very difficult. I get that. It's hard. And I would say when we look at where we are as a country, and some of you might disagree with me on this, I don't know. Maybe I'm more hopeful, maybe I'm more optimistic, but I would say our democratic institutions were badly damaged by what happened in '63 and in 1968. I don't think they've been destroyed yet. Yet again, there's this issue about that if we are to continue as a democracy, we need, if I'm being repetitive, I'm sorry, but we need to come to terms with some of these things, even 60 years later, okay? And I quote my friend Ed Tatro back in the back saying that, if we try to figure out what happened in Dallas, I mean, the easy part is to disqualify Oswald, as most of you know. The hard part is to figure, the who and why and who benefited. I think Ed's quote about a collaboration of the most powerful people in the country who aligned against Kennedy, who he made enough enemies against. Another former insider of the military-industrial complex, Gordon Ferry, who I've dealt with a little bit, said when he was alive, he was actually a former military part of a group that was attached to the Secret Service. His first thought was, which group, when JFK was shot? I thought that was interesting, okay? Because he knew there were enemies in powerful places. And I think the Texas School Book Depository, I always tell my students, a great place to start. Look at the guy that owned the building where Oswald was at and all his connections. He's connected to people in Texas. He has a crony relationship with Johnson. He's connected to the right-wing fanatic in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Curtis LeMay. And oh, by the way, and I haven't said this one before, but I was talking to Casey Quinlan, apparently at the time of the assassination, D.H. Byrd was big game hunting with Otto Skorzeny. the big Nazi that probably connected this. So basically, the guy that hired Oswald is 2 degrees of separation from some of the most dangerous and powerful people in America, outside America, I guess if you count Scorzini. If we look at what happened in Dallas, and of course, obviously, you've seen Oliver Stone's movie JFK, obviously 30 years ago. He did a great documentary just here recently. And I kind of think that, Stone was maybe never far from the truth about, if we look at what happened in Dallas as a coup d'etat with Lyndon Johnson waiting in the wings. That's a quote from the movie. I don't think that Stone was ever really that far from the truth in that respect. Okay, and then a little stuff. Okay, I've got, this is more philosophical, maybe, that I think is very important. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Is Mal here? Where's Mal at? Mal Hyman. It's one of his quotes. I stole it from him. Okay, back in the Jeffersonian era. And then the comment that Benjamin Franklin made, we have a republic if you could keep it, but everybody says that one. But what did Franklin say right after that? He said, it's our responsibility to keep it. If we don't pursue truth and justice, don't expect to keep that republic. Don't expect to keep that democracy, or however you characterize what we have at this point. Great quote from H.L. Mencken. Injustice is relatively easy to bear. What stings is justice. That's the hard part. Colonel Vindman, who was a whistleblower at Trump's first impeachment, you might remember that comment. He said, when he thought he felt threatened, he said, this is America, right matters. Does it? Does right matter? Maybe sometimes. Maybe not sometimes. Okay? If we take an honest look at our history, that this is one of the gravest injustices done in our 240 years of existence, and it still remains unsolved. That's why it's important. That's why we're here, right? And the quote on the left, that's mine, okay? I'm going to claim that one. I know how good it is. Cassie and I were talking about that right before. The only thing that stands between us and fascism is the truth. And we need the truth from our political leaders, our media, from our historians. And yes, John, I'm going to quote directly Mr. Newman on MLK on the last one. No lie can live forever. I love that quote. I've always kind of finished with that a little bit. My textbook, I'm sure other history tech. In fact, we were on a panel at Kappa, right? We had this whole conversation, right, about what's in the textbooks. Well, what's still in my history textbook describes Oswald as a mysterious figure, emotionally unstable, blah, blah, blah. And of course, there's no truth in that, right? We need to find the truth. And I appreciate all the folks here that are in pursuit of that. And, okay, I'm going to hold this. I guess I actually got done a little early. Cool. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and a lot of great speakers, a lot of them better than me, and I'm sure you will. We've actually got like 5 minutes for some questions. If you anything you'd like to ask, here I am. Any questions, anything you'd like to bring up? John, Dr. Newman.
A couple of things.
Yeah.
Number one, I want to applaud you for talking about the military and the CIA in terms of let's stop doing this either or business. Okay, let's do both and, right?
Right.
And then try and figure out where the water level comes out in that. But number two would be that actually it's not a little unit. The assistant chief
Could you? I didn't quite hear that, John.
actually,
Yes.
you said was a small unit.
Uh-huh.
It's not.
You feel like it had a wider net.
It's an enormous unit. I worked in it.
Okay.
several times. It's the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, United States Army, 2 stars. And then it became later bigger, called Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, was 3-star general. And they were Army intelligence.
Mhm.
Okay? And that's not a small unit. There were lots and lots of small units in actually, and then later in Destin. So
Okay.
it's a minor thing, but it is major in a certain way. The other thing I just want to make a quick comment on is Northwoods.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a 2-night special for the JFK Historical
Right.
And you can look at it. And I had unearthed a lot of National Security Agency evidence that Lemnitzer and his protege, Marshall Carter, who was the deputy at NSA, knew for a fact that those missiles were coming in February of 1962, and that they knew all along and never told Kennedy because they did not want him to know that. They wanted him to be backed up against the wall with the missiles ready to fire, and then
Force a decision.
like they wanted to do in the Bay of Pigs.
Right.
So you can see that it's all over the internet. It's on my my website, but you can also see, and I'm sure.
It's on Project JFK too, correct? Yeah, yeah. I would like to, I want to go back and look at that myself. Okay, yes, sir.
I think as far as the Bay of Pigs being planned to fail, Bissell is quoted as saying it was. I can't remember if it was a book he wrote or an interview by an author who wrote a book, but he's clearly quoted in a reputable source as admitting that. I think even Dulles, in his own unique way of phrasing things, acknowledged it.
Anything else? Go ahead, Bill.
You asked about Leo Chern.
Yeah, if you got anything on him, Bill, I'm open, man.
Oh, well, we can have it over a beer, but over 2 sentences. He was president of the International Rescue Committee.
Yeah, I saw that too, yeah.
Yeah, and they work with refugees, people in, pandemics. But it's like a lot of things, like Dorothy Matlack, she was Hungary as well as Cuba, working with defectors on all kinds of crazy things. It's a mixed bag over there. He was a CIA asset. They worked with him all the time. And Oswald wrote him asking for money. He wrote the organization. And then what was so weird was the State Department said, we can't understand why Mr. Oswald's typeface and the typeface for this committee are the same typeface. And nobody's figured that one out yet. I'm still working on it.
Just quickly, I want to ask you, Bill, do you think there's what significance to that redaction, the fact that Cherney, for whatever reasons, are withholding that?
Cherney was a heavy hitter, doing good and bad. He's very sensitive.
Okay, all right, good. Maybe one or two more questions. Go ahead, go.
I read obits, and John Daniel, who was 99, died a few years ago. Him, along with Barbara Howard and William Atwood, were liaisons for peace to Castro. So he was with Castro at the precise moment Kennedy is killed.
Exactly.
Castro is there. He says everything's going to change within hours. They'll be blaming it on me. But what's interesting is if you see the Bronson film, LBJ's on the walkie-talkie, probably to the spotters. The window is empty. D.H. Byrd's uncle, right? D.H. Byrd's uncle is Admiral Byrd.
Yeah, there's all kinds of connections to consider. Well, folks, we're going to have to get moving, and I apologize for the heat. We're going to move heaven and earth to try to get the hotel to do something with this, but we appreciate you hanging in. But hey, where's my man Don at? Mr. Ratliff, you want to come forward?
Why don't we do 5 minutes for a break and then come back?
Yeah, let's get out and get some fresh air, and then we'll try to come back in and Mr. Ed Tatro with his very intriguing presentation coming up next. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. If you were here live last night or if you were here on Zoom last night, welcome back. And if you're just joining us live or on Zoom, I want to welcome you. We're here in Memphis, Tennessee to do a conference that's entitled Declassifying the Political Murders of the 1960s, where we'll examine or re-examine the murders of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Medgar Evers. And before we get started with the presentation, we want to go ahead and bring up the publisher of Trying Day Books, Chris Milligan, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Come on up, Chris.
Do that?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Well, first I'm going to say a prayer.
Oh, okay, we'll do that too.
Okay. Again, good morning, and isn't it good that, we all got together? And first, okay, we can start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which we pledge one nation under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all. Well, I just wanted to thank you. Say some words because MLK was a preacher, and I think it's always good to remember that there is a unity among us all. Even though there's lots of divisions, there is unity. And I wanted to just do 2 quotes. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And then I wanted to give a quote from the Bible about Micah, from Micah. And it's, "What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God." So, you know, there's a lot of psychological warfare and propaganda out there, and they try and lead us one way or the other. And one thing that I found is that, you know, they'll try and lead us hard that way, and I've always found that somewhere the truth is generally a little bit more in the middle sometimes. And another thing I just wanted to bring up is that sovereign countries have a lot to do with what's going on, because sovereign countries stand on their own and do actions. Amen.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's important that we come to these conferences because it's an opportunity for us to learn new information, to re-examine old information, and to share with those who are here what we know so that they can learn from us and we can learn from them. And I'm really excited. I've been to a number of conferences and I'm going to continue coming to them because studying our history and learning the real history that took place and not what we were just told is important. And I'm really grateful to be a part of this. My name is Don Ratliff. I've been given the honor of being MC this weekend. And it's now my honor to introduce the person that is responsible for bringing this all together. That person is Professor David Denton. And David is a history professor at Olney Central College in Olney, Illinois. And he has a passion for studying history and bringing to light the true history of our nation. He's brought a number of his students here so that they can also learn from our presenters and learn from the people who are here. And I'm grateful that he has dedicated as much of his life and as much of his time to go ahead and putting these things together, because without people like him, the students, our children would be stuck with learning what they learned in high school history, which is really not the truth, as we all know. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to bring up Professor David Denton.
Let me just mention that Don Ratliff is one of the key people that we couldn't do all this without, and has been a great partner in all these things we've done in recent years in terms of presentations and such, and Dave Knight too, and I'll try to honor those guys during the course of the week and how important they've been to all this. You know, Chris made a comment about the justice, let justice well up as a mighty stream, Amos chapter 8. Great, I actually use that quote in my history book, is in my history stuff. So yes, justice is important. We're all seeking that. And I know we've got some true believers that are here and people have pursued that. I want to mention Paul Kunstler right here in the front row. I mean, he's usually the first guy that signs up for wherever we're going to be at. Paul's going to be there. And we got problems again. We good? Okay. As I was saying, a couple stories in regards to Paul. I believe a few years ago he took out a full-page ad on the USA Today, just trying to educate people about the JFK assassination. A lot of his personal wealth he used to do that, and he told me a great story the last time here about the fact in I think it was 2007. He confronted then Vice President. Up to be Vice President, later President Joe Biden on the campaign trail, and Biden's failed attempt to win the 2008 nomination, and he confronted him about the JFK assassination. I think what Paul told me is that Biden confided in him and he thought the CIA did it. But he had bigger things on his plans at that point in time. I wonder how many folks behind the scenes and our political leaders and folks that are, prominent in this country, if they've really taken an honest look at the evidence and some of the things these cases maybe think a lot closer to us. Maybe it's not politically expedient, I don't know. But we may have done better on some of these things than maybe what we think. I really believe that. As far as documents is concerned, we've talked about declassified documents, and we're going to talk about some more. I mean, hey, if you look at the national news, just last night or this morning, a 21-year-old person in the military was picked up for leaking classified documents. Of course, that's a big issue with the former presidents and the former vice president and the current president. In terms of treatment of documents, I know a lot of us here would like to just have a chance to see some of that stuff, in terms of national security, so we could have a better understanding about our past, right? Well, I would like to spend a little bit of time. I call this Stranger Things. Some of you are maybe fans of that TV series, and these are just some stories I've came across that I think are intriguing. They don't necessarily have any connection, but I think they're worth talking about. So listen, and I'll do that for a few minutes and make some announcements and get to, hey, Randy Benson, who flew in late last night, is going to give you a great starter on MLK coming after me, okay? Okay, I'm going to get back from what was last night here. Okay, so this was an intriguing thing that happened to me a couple months ago. I don't know if you've heard of this guy. His name is Frederick Whitehurst. If you haven't, you need to definitely do some investigation. I got a phone call from Frederick Whitehurst, and I really didn't know much about him. My friend Ed Tatro has had some contact with him. I'll speak about that in a minute. He's a famous FBI whistleblower. He was a forensic examiner in the FBI crime labs until the 1990s. Basically what he did was he chronicled over about a 10-year period how the FBI was basically doctoring evidence, making sure that they got convictions on certain folks in terms of manipulating the evidence or allowing others to walk. And he finally exposed all this and went public with it, left the agency. He actually won $1 million settlement from the FBI and his salary for the rest of his working life. So, like I say, if you Google him, he's probably the most famous FBI, or one of the most famous whistleblowers in the country. And he gave me a call, and I don't know how he got my number, whatever. I think he's about 75 years old now. I think back to what Ed said, and if you look into it a little bit, this guy, in some ways, is a national hero. When he was in Vietnam, he apparently saved some Vietnam villagers from being slaughtered. He had a couple other things that he did. And he was a very interesting conversation I had with him for about 45 minutes. He basically told me a story. And again, this story, he recounted to Ed back in the late 1990s after he left the agency that the FBI received a bullet that had been found on Dealey Plaza, so obviously 30 years later, by a custodian or somebody cleaning things up in the bushes or something. I'm not sure the exact thing, but, it was a bullet legitimately found on Dealey Plaza. Now, you got to think, well, I guess it could have been from some other situation, but, what's your first thought there? And his lab was in charge of examining that bullet, and that bullet had a speck of paint on it. And Whitehurst went into great detail, as obviously he's very knowledgeable about the the type of paint used on the presidential limo in the 1960s was a very specific kind of paint, and he believed that that paint matched the limo. Now, what the implications of that are pretty strong, right? Now, most of us here have already, obviously already eliminated the single bullet theory as ridiculous and indefensible on its face. But if we have ironclad evidence of a fourth bullet, that would mean that we're talking about in essence, the final destruction of the single bullet theory. And so I would say it was very significant what the FBI had. But Whitehurst left the agency after this, blow up he had with him. And I think Ed, did you not do a FOIA request on this bullet?
I tried everything. I contacted FBI, the archives, the Dallas police, and to clarify, it was construction workers.
Construction workers?
Construction work in Dealey Plaza who found the bullet.
Okay.
So because of Whitehurst, I had supper with him around 1996, and he encouraged me to pursue it as best I could. I found nothing. I could find nothing in documentation at all.
And that's, what's that now?
Where did they find it?
Ed, do you know the exact location?
No.
No, I'm not sure either. It seems like Whitehurst in the conversation talked about some bushes or someplace somewhere, but I can't give you an exact location.
The one thing that was important between the two of us, that takes 30 seconds, is that I had written an article about the paper bag found in the depository, and there are two documents in the archives, and they're the same document by the same FBI agent. The first and third paragraphs are the same, but the middle paragraph says, in one of them, that the paper bag was made from paper that's used to wrap boxes in the depository, and the other one said it wasn't paper used in the depository. They said an opposite. And I said, so, they forgot to get rid of one of them. FBI obviously had options of lies, and they decided to go one way instead of another, but they forgot in this case to get rid of the phony document or one of the documents. And I told that to Whitehurst, and what he had done is for 15 years he had compiled cases where the FBI let a guy who was guilty based on his evidence free, and then cases where people were innocent and were found guilty not using his evidence. And what he said to me, he said, what you're telling me is the FBI was doing this 15 years before I got there. And I said, exactly.
So, I mean, and you have to understand that knowing the FBI, that if they in fact had evidence this explosive, they probably did make it disappear. I mean, unfortunately. Now, I think the gist of the conversation that I had with Whitehurst was and this is where we're at on this now, is that to corroborate his story, his assistant that worked in that lab, who actually probably did the actual lab work, was a woman that worked with him. Now, I'm not going to mention her name because we're still deciding what we want to do in terms of trying to contact her, and this could be delicate. But she is teaching out in Oregon, I will say that. She left the FBI after Whitehurst. They were not, speaking of Whitehurst and her, on good terms. I think she was upset that he had blown the whistle and blown up the whole, situation, made things more difficult for her after he left. He admitted that. But we're trying to, I've had conversations with people how we might approach this person who could probably corroborate Whitehurst's story if she in fact, and that's kind of where we're at. With this program we're doing, I just haven't had time to really nail down. It's my intention to say, maybe go back and have another conversation with Whitehurst again, and maybe try to get to something where we could corroborate this thing, because again, how important this could be. I'll recount another story, and I know some of you have had this that kind of related to this. Ed mentioned Dennis David last night, who was at the autopsy, the Navy corpsman, great guy. Many of you have probably met him. And David has always told a story the night of the assassination when he had a security clearance at the autopsy, and he said an FBI agent came to him and poured a flask of bullet fragments on the table for him to signature off because he had a classification to do it. And he said there were at least enough fragments for 2 bullets there too, which means, again, do your number count. Shot misses, the shot that hits Tag, the so-called magic bullet. Well, if Dennis David saw fragments coming from Kennedy's body of at least 2 more bullets, you've got more than 3 shots there. It's simple math. And so those are examples where we can eliminate the single bullet theory, which is still the linchpin for any lone nut scenario. The whole thing goes up in smoke if we can accomplish that sort of thing, okay? So very interesting, the Frederick Whitehurst story. So, but the next one I've got gets stranger, okay? And again, maybe this guy may have contacted other researchers. I don't know. He lives over in St. Louis. His name is Mark Harris. And he contacted me by email. I was really reluctant to talk to him. I wasn't sure where this guy's even coming from. But I did have a conversation with him. And I listened to what he had to say. And I felt like this guy's not crazy. In fact, he eventually thanked me. He says, man, I'm just glad somebody's willing to listen to the story I have. And it is a strange story. Harris was married to a woman who had previous children. By the way, he's working in the aircraft industry, I think, over in Alton, Illinois, close to St. Louis. And his previous marriage with a woman, which led to divorce and separation. In fact, I think she ended up in a mental institution. But Harris would go ahead and take custody of his stepson from her marriage. But that son's grandfather was a man, I believe, by the name of Mickey Nobles. And I'm looking back at my notes. And Harris described him as an anti-government activist with ties to the CIA. He was involved in money laundering, racketeering, this is out of Florida, organized crime. And he was involved in Chris Milligan, who's done a lot of work on this stuff, might be interested in this story. He was involved with the radical Southern Freemasons, which is like, the whole Freemason stuff, and they're dating back to the Templars and thousands of years, and I don't know about all that stuff, but he described these people as serious, radical, dangerous people that were integrated into many of the institutions, judges, and places like that throughout the South. And, okay, fine. So when his daughter and Harris's ex-wife, her daughter was institutionalized, he took custody, I have that. But around 2008, he said basically Nobles kidnapped the kid, okay? And Harris made all kinds of attempts to get the kid back. Eventually, I think he did. But, and he was involved in legal action against this guy. And then all these things start to happen. There's all sorts of pushback against Harris for his actions against, there was some sort of protection bracket to protect this guy. He was insulated, judges, things like that, harassment. And he started to find things out. And the boy told him stories that were horrific, what happened to him while he was taken by his grandfather. It can only be described as where he was at in Florida, in Niceville, Florida, what would be described as I describe as a CIA house of horrors, where all sorts of things were going on, where young boys were taken, torture, pedophilia, even murder. And again, he kept talking about these connections with the Southern Freemasons. Now, it was interesting that Harris said, I don't believe in all this Freemason stuff. He said, but these people I was dealing with, they do. Even the address where this place was at, the first numbers were 1118. If you guys know anything about that, that has some sort of significance with the Knights of Templar. Again, I don't know enough about this stuff. But how does this all, I'm just thinking, okay, Mark, why are you telling me all this? You know I'm involved with the JFK stuff. What's pertinent to this story? And he got to it. He said, look, on the wall of this place that has now been leveled and is no longer in existence, this CIA safe, if you don't want to call it safe house, the address, I already mentioned that, but also they had what they described as the hero's gun on the wall. And he said it was stated that that gun was used in Dealey Plaza. Now, he also talked about the fact that a lot of cops in Dallas were Southern Freemasons, and we have to examine this radical right wing and their potential connections to the JFK assassination. But it certainly was an intriguing story that Harris gave me, and I wanted to relay it, and maybe it arouses some folks' curiosity about some of those things. Okay. So the story of the story of Mark Harris brought me back to another story that I've mentioned a few years back, and I think again Ed and I have kind of been working on this one because it also involves some, this apparently guy that Harris was dealing with was involved with organized crime in Florida. And again, some of you've heard me from years back have talked about this story. I think it's still an active story. I still think it's worth pursuing about Jack and his son Jackie Shepard. Ed and I have both dealt with Jackie Shepard through correspondence and also conversations, and he's got another, strange tale to tell. What is the truth? What are the accuracy behind it? And Jackie Shepard was a very young boy, but he has I have a very good memory about what his father Jack was doing. Our last contact with him, I don't know, Ed, maybe the last email correspondence with Jackie you've had maybe a year or two ago? I guess so. Yeah. And Jackie tells a story about his father Jack as someone who may have been involved in Dealey Plaza. He says as a young boy, Jackie recalled making a trip, this is a pretty incredible story, trip with his father to the LBJ ranch along with a contractor named Wade Bazemore, who we in fact know has had some dealings with Lyndon Johnson in terms of construction and contracts, from Fredericksburg, Texas. And on that trip, Jackie remembers, along with him, incredibly enough, was Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, that's the story he tells. He believes that his father, who has been his entire life in organized crime and serious and dangerous stuff, and may well still be alive. The last time we talked to him, Jack Shepard was still alive. In fact, ironically, living right next door to Jackie Shepard. Crazy stuff. But he remembers his father going out and target practicing, hunting deer in Texas, and just shooting deer one right after another in the throat all the time. Just taking shots in the throat. Throw the deer on the carcass on some back of a pickup and move on. He remembers that. And so he asked us to look into the things. Now, I don't know if you guys know Bill Pulte. I think he just died recently. Ed's had more connections than I had. I think a former professor down in Texas who was supposedly a great and knowledgeable researcher about all things Texas. And Ed went and contacted Bill and said, look, do you know anything about this Jack Shepard guy? And Pulte told him that he believes that Jack Shepard knew Jack Ruby. Okay. Well, we brought that story back to Jackie Shepard, and he was just amazed because, he was a very young boy, and he thought that he had seen Ruby with his father before, but he wasn't sure, and he was so thrilled when we brought that information to him. And so there were some other, the connections with Bazemore, this thing with Ruby, and is this story really legitimate? I mean, it certainly is worth pursuing. We even asked Jackie about this, and we said, well, what if if your father's still alive, what if somebody confronting him. He goes, I'll never forget the comment. It said, if you confront my dad, it's like confronting the Grim Reaper. So he must have been a pretty serious guy. So I thought it was worth mentioning that both the going back to that story, because again, both these things dealt with these organized crime figures in Florida and what their connections might be. So those are my strange stories, if you will, things to, maybe arouse some curiosity going forward here. And I appreciate all of you coming in a little early for the early bird session here. So before I turn this thing over, and Don's going to bring up Randy, and I'm sure it's going to be terrific. He's going to kind of give you an intro to the MLK side of things. Any other questions? Yeah, the Mark Harris story is very intriguing, to say the least. Yes, Janet.
Yeah. I think that Mark has a flash drive with stuff on it, because I know I've seen the pictures of some of the stuff that his
You've seen a
his
flash
kids-
drive from Mark Harris?
Yeah, he gave us a flash drive.
Wow. What's your impressions of him? I mean, I have not met him personally, just on the phone.
Well, you go ahead. I thought he was very emotional when he spoke about what happened to his kids.
Yeah, he's
and
gone through a
whatnot.
ton of stuff with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think he's making it up, but it's hard to tell. And this stuff, I'm looking at this, I don't know who this Jack and Jackie Shepherd are, but Bruce Bell, he never mentioned LBJ's ranch, but he's mentioned hunting trips as well. That they went in
That's right.
Texas, different places and hunting trips.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
also that he met Lee Oswald at his dad's business in Texas, so in Dallas, so.
And Ruby.
Intriguing
And
thread.
Ruby.
And here we go with Ruby again. Yeah, Ruby. Did Ruby know everybody in Texas?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to get off here. We're going to stay on track. Thank you very much, folks. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Professor David Denton. One of the things I want to comment real quickly about David's presentation is I think it's a perfect example of why it's important for us to do these conferences. I like to look at the JFK assassination and the other ones. I've studied JFK's a lot more. Kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And the dark forces that created the circumstances for the assassinations and covered it up tossed in a lot of pieces that don't fit. They were intended to keep us from ever getting to the truth. And with presentations like David's and others, we bring in new pieces of the puzzle and we see if they fit. Obviously, the magic bullet theory on its face didn't stand. Well, if there's one more bullet, clearly it has to be something other than what was told. Lee Harvey Oswald could not have fired 4 bullets. So obviously it had to have been a conspiracy that they didn't want us to talk about because it would have been easily unraveled and we would have gotten to the truth a lot sooner, publicly than we have now. So anyway, I appreciate him bringing into these things. It gives us the opportunity to examine these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle and see with our own eyes and our own minds whether they fit or whether they do not fit. If you would, let's go ahead and take about a 5-minute quick break, and then we're going to come back and we'll bring up Randy Benson, who will do a presentation on MLK 101. So 5 minutes, come on back.